Biden's plan intends to help fix what's known as range anxiety, the fear that your EV will not get you as far as you need to go before another charging station becomes available.
This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. If you watch as much TV as I do, you've seen that electric vehicle commercials are everywhere these days.
The new fully electric Audi RS e-tron GT.
The all-electric EQA by Mercedes EQ.
But despite all that marketing effort, the US still lags far behind other countries in electric vehicle adoption. When looking at the percentage of new car sales around the world last year, electric vehicles, or EVs, accounted for more than half of them in two countries, Norway and Iceland. In the US, EVs accounted for just 2% of new cars sold. More Americans buying an electric car wouldn't just impact the market, it would impact the planet. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gases in the US, creating more than 1.9 billion metric tons of emissions each year. But people quite literally don't seem to be buying into it. In the past few years, EV sales have actually been shrinking. Just over 64,000 plug-in hybrids were sold last year. That's about half as many as in 2018, according to the International Energy Agency. So why do we think that is? One of the biggest complaints was the phasing out of the federal tax credits for the cars. Many people felt as though it only benefited the wealthy.
Mr. President, Americans making over $100,000 a year claimed nearly 80% of electric vehicle tax credits in 2016.
Last week, the Senate approved an amendment which would eliminate the $7,500 federal tax credit for electric vehicles costing more than $40,000 and for households with more than $100,000 of declared income, but it still needs to be approved by the House. Then there's also the upfront cost for these types of cars. The average sticker price on an EV is $19,000 higher than an average gasoline-powered car, according to the National Resources Defense Council. It can even out over time, though. Over the anticipated 15-year lifespan of an EV, the electricity required to run a battery-powered electric car can be nearly $15,000 cheaper than filling up a gas-powered car. But that's not necessarily the case everywhere. In Hawaii, which is an example on the other end of that spectrum, charging up your car would actually end up costing you nearly $3,000 more than filling up the gas tank in that same time period. Further complicating the statistics is the fact that there are hybrid EVs, which give you both charging and gas options, as well as plug-in EVs, in which your only option is to charge up. And that leads us to the next problem with these eco-friendly cars. Not everyone lives near a charging station, which can make things inconvenient. Fewer than 10% of Americans have easy access to an electric vehicle charging station. It's also worth noting Black and Latino communities have significantly fewer charging stations than white neighborhoods.
If you're going to drive several hundred miles, beyond the range of your battery, there's a certain amount of uncertainty of if there's going to be chargers where you're going, if they're going to be available. So we need this base level of charging infrastructure to get consumers over the fear that there might not be charging available where they're going.
Then there's also the cost of electricity. It might not vary as much as gas prices can, but the cost is still going to range since, in most cases, individual station owners can set the charging price, and it will surely be more than what you pay to just plug in at home.
So I think it's all about getting us to that tipping point over the next couple of years and getting the general market and consumers comfortable with the idea of driving electric vehicles.
The thing is, plugging in at home can also be an investment depending on how far you're driving. If you have a further commute, you might need what's known as level 2 charging equipment, and not every home is equipped to handle that, so you'd have to get it installed. Right now, the US has just over 100,000 public chargers available. Just 18% are considered level 3, which can recharge an EV battery in an hour or less. Now, in an effort to change that, part of President Biden's infrastructure bill would invest more than $7.5 billion to create charging stations all across the US. But that's not the president's only hope for EVs. By 2030, Biden also wants half of all new car sales to be electric vehicles. But Are these goals even feasible after seeing where we currently stand compared to other parts of the world? Newsy's Tyler Adkison talks to experts about their thoughts.
President Joe Biden's American Jobs Plan includes $7.5 billion to build out a national network of 500,000 EV charging stations. This new funding will help the U.S. start moving toward Biden's goal of electric vehicles accounting for half of all new car sales by 2030. But experts tell Newsy this federal funding will likely not be enough to kick EV adoption into high gear.
We're looking at over 30% of the vehicles by 2030 to be sold here will be battery electric. For us to get to that point of market saturation, or where the Biden administration would like for it to go, I think we will end up seeing some form of standardization, just so people can feel comfortable when they're out traveling, not having to worry about, let me find my specific network of chargers so I can plug in.
Biden's plan intends to help fix what's known as range anxiety, the fear that your EV will not get you as far as you need to go before another charging station becomes available. That's a key issue for consumers. The Tennessee Valley Authority, the largest public utility in the U.S., told Newsy that their customers commonly cited worries about being able to recharge as a reason for not buying an electric vehicle.
If you look at the infrastructure that's out there now, specifically fast charging, the majority of it is concentrated in the major cities, the Nashvilles, the Knoxvilles. We're looking to put fast chargers every 50 miles along the major, not just interstates, but U.S. and state highways, really trying to connect all of our communities together and give that basic foundational network.
Utility companies who will oversee the power necessary to charge those vehicles say the federal funding for charging stations helps alleviate some range anxiety concerns, but they see EV adoption as being equally shaped by local and state governments.
We're eagerly watching how the infrastructure bill sort of turns out at the federal level. But that hasn't stopped us sort of at the local and state level here in New England and Massachusetts, Connecticut, especially from advancing this conversation about reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through the electrification of transportation. Massachusetts, the state has articulated a goal of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 100% by 2050.
According to Cox Automotive and Kelley Blue Book, electric vehicle sales made up just under 8% of the nearly 4 million vehicles sold in the U.S. during the first quarter of 2021. So getting them up to 50% by 2030 will be ambitious. Utilities and market analysts told Newsy that beyond funding, getting more people behind the wheel of an electric car relies on educating more people about what they can expect as EV owners, like where they're going to recharge.
We know that 80% of charging for those who are so able, who have a driveway, have a garage, right, are going to do 80% of charging at home.
I've heard reports that stated that battery range is something that range anxiety goes away after a couple of weeks of ownership, once they realize, like, I actually can go where I want to go and I don't have to worry about not being able to get back home. And so, again, it's such a tough sell, because I've always stated that we're not just looking toward people buying a different car. We're looking for them to change the relationship with the car that they've had all their lives.
Tyler Adkison, Newsy, Chicago.
When you're back, we're going to shift our focus to Afghanistan, one of the most closely watched parts of the world right now. We'll give you the latest and tell you more about how the Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan is having ripple effects elsewhere.